We're on the air. We're just going to dive right into Monkey Time tonight. We got a lot of things to talk about. The most important of which is the new X-Men movie. Ed, is Jason? Jason's gone, right? Jason's gone. The one person here at RTN that would be totally with me on the new X-Men movie has moved on. But it's actually pretty good. I don't know. I'm supporting Bryan Singer, who has, been accused of this whole Hollywood get cute young guys with you, and then they do it with women too. I mean, get cute young guys to hang around you and force them to have sex with you and give them lots of drugs, and then you'll give them a role in your next movie kind of thing, yeah, that. So I didn't quite know what to do, but I grew up on the X-Men. Cut me some slack. So anyway, I gave Bryan Singer my $6.50 in Mission Valley. And it was actually a pretty good, I thought it was a pretty good X-Men movie. They covered a lot of things. There's a lot to quibble about, but I thought it was pretty damn good. The action sequences are great. They deal with the time travel 65% intelligently, which is like 50% more intelligently than most movies deal with time travel. Certainly more intelligent than the way Looper dealt with time travel. But, okay, so we got a bunch of things to talk about. The Moral Monday protests are still going on. I love these sit-in things, And do you notice how the legislative police and the police are just kind of going, we're going to give you citations this time, right? They're really they recognize that what gets the most attention is large numbers of arrests, right? And scenes of people getting busted. So the Republicans have gotten a little bit smarter this year, which means the Democrats or the lefties are going to have to get more smarter. Sorry, the Democrats were kind of late to the party on the Moral Monday stuff, and they're still kind of mostly absent. What does this Democratic Party say? I don't know. It seems to me the Democratic Party is not doing much to take advantage of the energy from Moral Monday. The Democratic Party in North Carolina has a lot of problems, and so you and I are going to have to move around the Democratic Party to make sure that we don't get completely screwed in the 2014 election. Kay Hagan is far from perfect, but Thom Tillis as our senator with Richard Burr from North Carolina, man, they are salivating over that crap. We have got to stop Thom Tillis, so that's the main thing. So get Kay Hagan reelected, but make sure she at least makes a few promises. I don't know, I shouldn't say that because that means that the Kay Hagan folks can take my vote for granted. And you know what? You can't, because I'm this close, Kay Hagan, to letting you go. I really am. You've just been ineffectual. You have not stood up the way we want you to stand up in North Carolina. You think the middle ground's going to keep your seat against a highly engaged Republican base. Ain't gonna happen, Kay Hagan and Kay Hagan's advisors. Ain't gonna happen. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, we have to be engaged and sharp and alert between now and November. We have to make sure Thom Tillis loses that Senate seat. We have to. They're going to pour money in because the Republicans are salivating, like I said, at the idea of gaining the U.S. Senate and the House against Obama, who's kind of shown himself to be kind of an ineffectual Democratic president and weakening more and more as he's a lame duck. The last 2 years, are you kidding? Jay Carney, all these people are leaving. This is normal. It happens in Republican administrations, happens in Democratic administrations. Anytime you've got a two-term president in the 6th year, everybody starts abandoning ship, right? Because they know those last 2 years are going to be a bitch, and they don't want to be part of it. They don't want to be around for it, right? The lame duck presidency, it's a thing. So anyway, long story short, Obama's a fairly weak president. If the Republicans gain the Senate, as well as the House, control of the Senate, as well as the House, we are going to be royally screwed. So we have to make sure that we do our part in North Carolina, and that Kay Hagan keeps her seat. As lame as she is, Thom Tillis is 18 times worse. You know what I'm saying? So what can you do? Can you make some phone calls, right? Can you drive people to the polls? Can you keep alert to what the Republicans are going to do between now and November to close polling places in heavily Democratic districts? Watch. It's coming. Watch. This is one of the things they do, right? So anyway, let's talk a little bit, before we get to the NNO's ridiculous editorial op-ed writer, this guy John Peter Zane, who used to be their book editor. I used to think he was a nice guy, but then when he started doing these editorials in the N&O, they're really deeply insulting and shallow and don't honestly, they're intellectually dishonest. John Peter Zane's editorials in the N&O are intellectually dishonest. They don't engage with the real positions of thoughtful people on the left. They engage with these fake positions that he makes up in his head, and then he makes more positions that he twists to bring things like Europe, Europe's decline. We'll get to John Peter Zane's idiotic column in today's N&O later. But the first thing we got to talk about might seem a little boring, especially compared to the X-Men movie, which I thought was pretty good. It's not as good as the first one, but it was pretty good. It had heart. There were emotional scenes where I actually kind of, the little 10-year-old boy that was reading the X-Men, no, I was 12 when the X-Men rebooted with Storm and Colossus and Nightcrawler, and all those folks and Wolverine in the mid-'70s. I was 12 years old then and just totally bonding. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, something more boring. The public-private partnerships that Pat McCrory and Art Pope want to create for economic development in North Carolina. Sarah Ovaska at ncpolicywatch.org, just type into Google or whatever your DuckDuckGo, whatever your search engine is, NC Policy Watch, right? It'll come right up. Sarah Ovaska had a really interesting column about yet another person that Pat McCrory has hired who seems completely unqualified for the job. He hired this guy to lead the new public-private economic development, corporation and get corporations to come to North Carolina kind of guy, right? Whose specialty, and I use the term loosely, is failing companies. Failing companies. And Sarah Ovaska interviews a number of people and does a lot of research that points out that this guy actually was cited by a judge for being horrible in dealing with a bankruptcy proceeding that he was supposed to be managing. He had to pay back $250,000, $250,000 after getting paid $175,000. He had to pay back. This is the guy Pat McCrory and Art Pope chose to lead the new Office of Economic Development in North Carolina. A guy who specializes in crappy companies that have failed and helping to turn them around. But in one of those cases, he got called out by a judge who said, this is illegal behavior, what you're doing. This is the kind of person that Pat McCrory and Art Pope are putting in charge of this new Office of Economic Development, which is a public-private partnership, right? And if you go to my Twitter page, T-Morman, T-M-O-R-M-A-N, at the end of the show tonight, I'll have up a couple of links. Sarah Ovaska's piece about this guy is very factual and just points out how he's failed in many, many ways. Hey, we all fail financially. He ended up trying to file for bankruptcy himself. This is the guy that Pat McCrory has got to avoid the penalties from the court case where he was cited by a judge for doing illegal activity. He tried to go bankrupt himself out of that. This is the guy in their infinite wisdom that Art Pope and Pat McCrory have chosen to head North Carolina's Office of Economic Development, or whatever it's called, right? They're setting us up for a huge corruption scandal in the future. Anyway, if you check the NC Policy Watch link by Sarah Ovaska about this guy, at the bottom buried is a link to a report from an organization called Good Jobs First, where they look at these new public-private partnerships for economic development in 8 states. 3 years ago, there were 4 states that are trying this. Now there are 8, including North Carolina, that are trying this. Instead of an economic development office that, this is important, is subject to state open records laws, right? And transparency and accountability to the legislature. They're setting up these public-private, quote-unquote, organizations that aren't going to be subject to state open records laws. And so what this organization, goodjobsfirst.org, does, they have a report. It's been 3 years since these things really took off. There's now 8 states doing these public-private partnerships. Let's look at how they're doing. And you know what they find? Shocker. Oh, shoot, I shouldn't use that twice. That minimizes the impact. It's like cussing, right? When you cuss too much, you minimize the impact of the cussing. You got to reserve those F's and S's, you know what I mean? You got to reserve them for when you really mean them. So anyway, What do they find? This is goodjobsfirst.org. You may say it's a lefty organization, but they're citing facts. You can look up the facts yourself. I never just trust anyone, especially people like John Peter Zane in the NNO. Oh my God, when he says something, you know that you got to, check that out, right? Reporters, your mother tells you she loves you. Check it out. That's the reporter's credo. Yeah. Anyway, report. Privatized state development agencies create scandals instead of jobs. 3 years ago, newly elected governors in several states decided to outsource economic development to public-private partnerships, PPPs, right? Together with a handful of other states' PPPs, these experiments in privatization have, by and large, which is interesting because they're saying a couple of them may be working, become costly failures characterized by misuse of taxpayer funds, conflicts of interest, excessive executive pay. This guy who filed for bankruptcy to avoid a judgment against him for mishandling someone else's bankruptcy, that Pat McCrory and Art Pope have decided should head this office, he's making 120 grand a year. After a judge called him out, he had to pay back $250,000 in the case he botched of somebody else's bankruptcy. Oh, he's a specialist in troubled companies. As somebody pointed out in Sarah Vasquez's piece, some expert on these kind of development offices, why would you want somebody who specializes in troubled companies heading your economic development office? Why? Those are not the kind of companies you want. Exaggerated job creation. Excessive executive pay and bonuses, questionable subsidy awards, exaggerated job creation claims. I love this. This is just like the city of Raleigh and the Downtown Alliance saying, oh, there's $1.5 million that came from the Ironman race, right? Oh, how much money did local businesses lose? How much money did that downtown restaurant that counts on Sunday brunch as one of its busiest meals of the week lose? The store I work for, I'm not speaking for them, I'm not the owner, but the store I work for, I can tell you, lost over 2/3 to 3/4 of our business during the Ironman race because it closed down Hillsborough Street from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on a weekend. See, the city employees, the city people, they're off on the weekend. That's a nothing day. Yeah, schedule all the races on the weekends. What they don't realize is that us, Cup of Joe, Nice Price, we're all open on the weekends. And those are often Saturdays our busiest day. They get a bunch of drunk people running in the middle of the afternoon on Saturday afternoon in costumes, right? It's cute. I mean, somebody running down the street in a banana costume drunk racing for the beer race, in the middle of a Saturday afternoon. It's cute, but it kills our business in the middle of the afternoon on the busiest day of the week for us. But the city employees that make these decisions, they're off on Saturday and Sunday. They don't think like that. So it's like these job projections, this is my point, these job projections on these public-private, exaggerated job projections. It's just like the city of Raleigh and the Downtown Raleigh Alliance, exaggerating the claims about how much money these outside for-profit companies bring to the city. They don't even bother to count how much money local businesses lose when the street they're on closes. Now, I'm not saying that will be significant. I don't know. What I am saying is the Downtown Raleigh Alliance and the city of Raleigh, when they make these projections about how great these races are for the city, they don't even talk to the businesses on the route and say, how much money in dollars are you losing that day? And subtract that from these races do so much for the city. They don't even bother to count the losses before they crow about how great this is for the city. What it is it's great for the hotels and not so great for the businesses, the daily, hardworking, tax-paying businesses that line downtown and the streets. Not to mention the churches, which we've seen letters in the NNO about those this week. People pissed about the churches being closed. Not being able to get to their church on time because of this stuff. They're using the same route downtown over and over and over again because the Downtown Raleigh Alliance has its head up its ass. That's my theory. And they think anything that happens downtown is good for downtown. And they're not even bothering to survey the businesses that are part of the Downtown Raleigh Alliance about how much money they lose when they crow about how good these races by outside companies are. for Raleigh. And back to our point, that's what we're getting with these exaggerated job claims the goodjobsfirst.org folks are saying. 8 states with existing public-private partnerships, PPPs, and 1 more proposed. You ready? We conclude that privatizing a state development agency, that's the agency that tries to bring new businesses, right? Privatizing it is an inherently corrupting move that states should avoid or repeal. Taxpayers are best served by public agency employees who are fully covered by ethics laws and conflict of interest laws, open records acts, and oversight by auditors and legislators. All they're doing, all Art Pope and Pat McCrory are doing, and hoping you don't notice, in setting up these development agencies as public-private, PPP, public-private partnerships, is getting these decisions out from under open records laws that apply to state employees, and oversight, auditing oversight that apply to state employees. That's the goal here. And what happens in state after state when you do that? When you set up these public-private partnerships, mostly private, outside the realm of open records laws and outside the realm of the auditors that deal with state employees, what happens? Shocker. That's the 3rd time I used it, sorry. Cronyism. Pay to play. In Florida, the organization, the development organization, sells seats on its board to corporations for $50,000 and then gives away taxpayer-funded subsidies and vendor contracts to those very corporations. So it sells seats on its board to corporations for $50,000 and then gives away, those people get preferential treatment for taxpayer subsidies and vendor contracts. That's what's happening in Florida. Shortfalls in the job creation performance of the companies it has recruited, Enterprise Florida has faced. Controversies over, oh, guess this, a performance bonus paid to this public-private organization's CEO. What a shocker. And subsidies awarded to corporations presented on its board. In Arizona, that was Florida. In Arizona, the first chief executive of the Arizona Commerce Authority was given a 3-year compensation package worth $1 million. Even though he resigned after a year, he still received a $60,000 bonus. Wisconsin, millions of dollars in funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development was spent without legal authority. They failed to track past due loans, and, oh, it just goes on and on. Jobs Ohio received a large transfer of state monies. This is the public-private partnership. The legislature was not informed when a large transfer of state money was given to this public-private partnership. This is what McCrory and Art Pope and all their buddies want to set up here. In Ohio, large transfer of money about which the legislature was not informed. Intermingled public and private money. Jobs Ohio, the organization there, refused to name its private donors and then won legal exemption from review of its finances by the state auditor, who was a Republican. They won a public-private partnership, won a legal exemption from review of its finances just because they included some private companies in there. The state auditor says, oh, I can't review that. That's what we're setting up here. We've seen it again and again. Should I go on about Indiana and Rhode Island? This is a classic one. This has been all over the web. $75 million loan to the now bankrupt 38 studios in Rhode Island. Indiana, job creation claims are exaggerated. A state audit found that more than 40% of the jobs promised by companies described by the Indiana Economic Development Corporation as economic successes had never materialized at all. 40% of the jobs, more than 40% of the jobs promised by this public-private partnership had never materialized at all. It goes on and on. Go to my Twitter page, twitter.com/tmormon. I don't have it up yet, but I will in about an hour. And you'll see the link to goodjobsfirst.org, their report about how these PPPs are actually working in other states. And McCrory and Art Pope have this data. Why are they pushing for this? Because auditors won't have as much power to audit these organizations' finances because they're private, public, right? That's one of the reasons Art Pope wants this. The other reason is that state open records laws do not apply. When public-private organizations are involved, you can fudge that. Legislative oversight doesn't apply. We saw that in Ohio. They handed huge amounts of state money to this organization with no legislative oversight. The legislature is supposed to control state money. The only reason to set these things up, to turn this into a public-private thing, is to avoid scrutiny. And guess what? That leads to corruption. All right. I spent a lot of time on that, but that seems important. Oh, yeah. I love this, this article in John Peter Zane in the NNO, I guess it was yesterday, in yesterday's NNO. Mean Republicans may be NC's last best hope against economic ruin. He claims that the liberals who are saying, you know, when you give tax cuts to the rich and then cut funding for people in wheelchairs on disability, that maybe not so moral, and maybe as a society we should do better. He talks about that as, that's a progressive paradise. You know, a little tax hike here and there, but don't worry, the bill won't be coming to your mailbox unless you're a greedy plutocrat. It's like, no, we're not saying everyone's a greedy plutocrat. We're saying the legislature is making decisions that benefit wealthy people. You see how he writes and how it's all over-the-top rhetoric and very little light. It's all heat. And he'll throw in a little bit of light, a little factoid here and there. Lord knows, check everything J. Peter Zane says and that claims as a fact, right? But here's the more important part, his fundamental assumptions. He's one of these knee-jerk, die-hard libertarians. It's like a new convert, you know, when somebody like gives up smoking or something and they're the worst anti-smoking advocate, you know what I mean? He's one of those new converts who's just like so convinced of the rightness of his cause that he can't even be bothered to have an intellectually honest conversation with the people he's claiming to oppose. Instead, he talks about them as, instead of condemning North Carolina's lawmakers, we should thank them for responding to the coal mine canaries chirping all around us. Coal mine canaries chirping all around us. The state legislature has created changes in the tax code that benefit wealthy people and is now attacking payments to people who are disabled, cutting them off. Just cutting the rolls and saying to people who are disabled and rely on government checks to help them survive, cutting them off. And John Peter Zane, in the infinite wisdom of his libertarian position, is calling those chirping canaries all around us. Oh, those chirping canaries. Demanding that we live within our means is branded as just plain mean. Why are we changing the tax code to benefit the wealthy while we're cutting government funding to people on disability who have the worst situation among us or are among the poorest among us? To him, oh, that's just demanding we live within our means. Giving tax cuts to the wealthy, which we did, and John Peter Zane knows this, but he thinks the wealthy deserve it because they're the jobs creators, while cutting the safety net for people at the very bottom who have trouble working or can only work sporadically, disabled people, right? Or who work all the time and are struggling to make ends meet because they're working all the time and not making much money. Either way, those are chirping canaries that that are all around us. And it's just me, they're just saying, oh, demanding, you're not demanding that we live within our means. And then he pulls out all this crap about Europe and Detroit. The crisis in Europe isn't it's partly because some states have welfare systems that are beyond their means, but the major part of it is the IMF and the austerity requirements, right? The banks get paid first. Oh, John Peter Zane doesn't talk about that. He just throws out the problems in Europe and says, oh yeah, that's part of my argument too. No, it's not. It's the exact opposite of John Peter Zane's argument. Because once again, the rich are getting more money while the poor are being asked to suffer under austerity measures. And he would call that class warfare, but what we would say in response is it's only funny how it's only class warfare when we fight back. You know? It's not class warfare when it comes from the rich down to us, but when the poor fight back, oh, that's class warfare. And John Peter Zane is so, it's classic middle class garbage. He thinks he can be part of the upper class, if he just sucks up to them enough, right? It's classic. It's a classic psychological position. Well, he's doing it in the pages of the N&O. I can do it on my own, dumbass little cable access TV show, right? He psychologizes his opponents instead of dealing with their arguments. He does it over and over and over again. Their big government approach, the approach that says, hey, maybe caring for people on disability is more important than giving a tax cut to the rich, is undeniably unsustainable. What's unsustainable is continuing to screw the poor and give that money to the rich. But he doesn't see it that way. It's just one of those things. Blue states tend to offer generous services, he admits, which provide some benefit to their citizens. But this beneficence is becoming their own beneficence. Notice the language. He's saying that a state that provides basic support for people with disabilities at the bottom of the economic scale is ruining itself. But providing tax cuts to the people at the top, that's just the way a state should be. It's this mindless, narrow, libertarian, capital L positioning that is just so idiotic. It has nothing to do with the real world, but it professes to be the only true realistic solution. It's just classic. Oh yeah, there's some benefit to some citizens. And really, what do you think, John Peter Zane, specifically about the proposal to cut benefits for people with disabilities? What do you think specifically, John Peter Zane, about that proposal right there when compared with the proposal that cuts taxes for people in the class you hope someday to possibly be part of? What do you think about that, John Peter Zane? It's an intellectually dishonest argument that fails to address the real moral center of the left-wing position. Instead, it dismisses it, chirping canaries. And the N&O publishes this guy regularly on its op-ed page. He gets hits, I guess. The comments on the piece on the N&O are just, a couple of them just really nail it. It's juvenile. It's like high school sophomore logic. And it's disgusting that this is showing up in the N&O. John Peter Zane's pieces in the N&O are increasingly disgusting in that they don't even engage honestly with the intellectual arguments of his opponents. He just dismisses them with insults. Why is the N&O regularly publishing insults like this? Oh, it gets hits, right. Okay. All right. I'm still not convinced that the Disney Star Wars movie is going to be any good now that they've announced 2 new women characters. I don't think J. Abrams has it in him. I don't think he's going to do a good Star Wars movie at all. I think he's a hack. So, take care of each other. We'll see you next week.